Okay, well, it's 5 after, and I think it's just us. So let's go ahead and get started if you guys are ready.
Ready.
Cool. The rest of you guys can just give me a thumbs up. That way I know you guys can hear us. Cool. Okay, so we're going to be doing our usual format, names, pronouns, and the icebreaker, which for this month will be what is one thing that you want to incorporate into your life this year? And as always, I'll go first. So my name is Jonathan. My pronouns are he, him. And my one thing to incorporate into my 2025 is going to be patience. I really got to work on patience. uh, it's always been a struggle for me, but I'm really hoping this year I can focus on really incorporating that into my life. Okay, what about you guys? Who wants to go next?
Yeah, I can go next. Hello everybody. My name is Grace Bomulum. My pronouns are they, them, and this year I am actually kind of already doing it. Was I wanted to be a part of a book club and I wanted to read at least 15 books this year. I'm usually on track, but then something sidetracks me. And so I started using StoryGraph. And so I'm really happy to be here. So that's my goal, is to just try to be in books more to make it through this year.
I can go next. My name is Saul. I use he, him pronouns. I think I want to incorporate more discipline into my year this year. I'm back in school doing a grad program, and with that comes a lot of having to actually choose to do homework and really stick to it, as well as just taking more priority with my health. So, kind of balancing those, really meaning to be more disciplined with how I choose to move forward.
Okay, I can go next. My name is Cameron. I also go by Cam. My pronouns are he, him. What I want to incorporate a little bit more this year is more of a work-life balance, and lean a little bit more into the life realm of that balance. Hoping that this book club will be helpful for that, and also trying to meditate a little bit more, and then just make more space for the things and activities that I enjoy.
I guess that leaves me. My name is Michael. I use he, him pronouns. And I don't really have anything off the top of my head that I want to add to my life that I'm like not already doing. I don't know. I was trying to think of an answer everyone else was going and I couldn't come up with one, so I'll just say no answer. Sorry.
Okay, so I will start us off by asking, what did you all think of this month's book, The Other Man by Farhad, Dadyburjor?
Yeah. I thought it could have been better. I liked the idea and I liked a lot of the characters. They just didn't feel very fleshed out as much as I was kind of hoping for. Um, and it just kind of felt like it was just like a manic pixie dream boy scenario where just felt kind of like a kind of standard rom-com almost. But that's kind of how I kind of felt as I was going through it. I was like, oh my gosh, just stop already. And I felt more frustrated than I thought I was going to with the main character, for sure.
Unfortunately, I kind of agree with Grace. I did not love the book, or maybe I just am a little bit over some of the really unrealistic love stories. I But it was not my favorite, and I didn't feel like it really did some of the characters justice or like give them a lot of depth outside of relationships, and there was a lot of opportunity for that I don't know that we got. But that's my initial reaction.
Yeah, I agree with both Michael and Grace. To add on to it, I think that we have also read so many other books with like lots of different twists or reimaginings that not that this book was boring, but it just felt more basic, like a story that I had already read before. Um, that maybe I wouldn't have kept on reading if I didn't really want to figure out what was going to be the ultimate end for the characters. So not my favorite, but not a bad book either.
I agree with all of the above. For me, this was a change of pace. I don't normally read rom-coms or like romance type books. So I actually kind of like that it was like a little bit like of an easier read, and like I didn't have to, I guess, like think as hard. So that was really nice, just kind of breeze through it. But yeah, many of the characters were aggravating. And that maybe kind of took away from it, but otherwise it wasn't too bad for me.
Yeah, I think it's easy to guess what I'm gonna say, but I didn't like this book at all. I'm willing to give it a little bit of a break. I understand that rom-coms are very formulaic, and they're not really meant to be challenging or to really push any boundaries or to change the world. So the author didn't do any of that, so that's okay. But it just felt underdeveloped, like there wasn't enough thought put into it. The characters, like Grace said, felt just underwritten. They weren't fully fleshed out for me, especially some of the love interests, and even the romantic element of the story just felt underdeveloped. Um, I think it's a really, really cool premise. I think it definitely could have used some more editing or some rewriting. And I guess that starts me off at my first question is, considering the book's premise and the characters, do you think this is the best book to write a rom-com out of?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I was kind of hoping at the end that um the main love interest wouldn't ever talk to him again, and he would learn his lesson and then like find another new love interest, and then that would kind of like been like a nice ending. I feel like you probably could get a rom-com out of this, and hopefully the director would do more. It's kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah, for me, I think the premise could have led to more, mostly considering the laws that it was kind of talking about in terms of um, like same-sex relationships in India. I thought that that would have been really great to explore a little bit more and talk more about this kind of forbidden love in this setting. That I wish it would have just done more of that. Because it was also really interesting that it could have talked about how because Ved was a very rich person that he kind of got to be, well, it could have talked more about how he could have maybe been above that law or circumvented that law or just done a lot more exploration around maybe class in India as well as kind of this legal and maybe not even just legal but cultural view of same sex relationships in India.
I agree with Saul 100%. I feel that the author could have leaned much more heavily into the cultural pieces of especially the main character. I found it unique for me that this was a story that involved two queer characters, both from different cultural backgrounds. Um, and I thought that was a really interesting piece, that it was kind of a missed opportunity that they didn't really expand upon that, and how that would affect their relationship as well. Um, the forbidden love was also, I thought, sort of a missed opportunity too. I mean, um, I just kept kind of asking myself as the novel kept going on, like, what is it that Carlos sees in Ved? Um, that I felt that they could have played it up a little bit more, or could have explored that a little bit more.
Yeah, I love. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Grace.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I really agree with both of you, and I also felt like there was like a missing. Someone mentioned like a missing element of like classism in the book, and how it'd been really good to, maybe have other, queer aligned characters and kind of learn about like the underground, movement, or like kind of tie that in, because I was really curious about that aspect and how much felt missing. And I just kind of feel like the main character was like too rich to get it. I don't know, like that's kind of how it felt. And then yeah, like what did Carlos see? Because I that's why I was really hoping that Carlos would actually have ignored him the whole time and actually not came back, so that maybe we could have like done some sort of lesson learning a little bit or something. And I just didn't like that he didn't respect boundaries and just kept texting Carlos all the time. That really irritated me. But
Especially for what almost seemed like months. I thought that was wild as well, Grace. I'm glad you pointed that out. But also, yeah, I also kind of what you had said, Grace, about sort of not getting a better um, sort of glimpse into sort of the uh, I guess like queer culture in India. Yeah, it seemed like it was really one dimensional, that we were only sort of getting the perspective of Indian men who were married and down low, or somehow already engaged in partnership, but um, sort of dating, or engaging in other sexual relations on the side. So yeah, it would have been interesting to kind of see a little bit more about what that world had actually looked like from multiple perspectives.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. And I'm glad that Soul, you brought up the Section 377 law. I found it interesting how much of an afterthought that whole part of the story seemed. I found out through the author that while the book was published after Section 377 was outlawed, it was written before it was. So I just found it kind of odd that being a gay Indian man like the author is, living in India, which I believe he does, or did at some point, that he wouldn't choose to focus a bit more on that. That seemed like such a prevalent part of the culture as a whole, but also why he and Carlos can't really be as open as they would like to be. Um, and I guess I'm curious, did you guys feel as if that was an afterthought as well, or did it seem included enough to you?
yeah, I thought it was an afterthought, and I thought it was going to be explored a lot more, especially like more consequences of being in the paper. I feel like that paper aspect too was like kind of glossed over a little bit. I was really confused how anyone could be able to tell, because he even described the paper as it being blurry, but you knew it was definitely him for sure. I was like, I don't even understand what's going on like right now. And like how that would all come about, because it would have been nice, especially maybe in the, I don't know, like the epilogue, to talk about like how that law like affected them and being more open potentially. Or just because a law is removed doesn't mean that the dynamic of walking through the world changes for people, because people, a lot of people's minds may not have been changed. So I would have liked that to be explored a lot more as well. And it just kind of seemed like it was a very weak thread that was interwoven, just almost as like an afterthought, because it seems like a really big deal.
Yeah, I also was a little curious if there was any sort of like aspect of like punishment or prosecution, and if there was, I don't remember it being mentioned, or it didn't seem like it was that big of a deal, because we didn't see anyone like actually get in trouble as much as they talked about it.
Yeah, I totally agree with Michael because I was surprised by that big gay party that apparently had been running for years. That and people seem to know that that's what it was. That could happen at the same time that the law was happening. So was the law something that was in the books but people didn't really care about, but it was still this like cultural stress that people lived under, which I'm sure was very real, and maybe continues to be in India. And then I was also then surprised by the job that Ved had after he quit, of like, oh, so these, I wasn't sure, like, did this organization, because it seems to be in India, um, exist while the law was also going on? So it's okay to provide resources and have organizations for queer people. So it raised a lot more questions for me. I also maybe thought that in sometimes the author, and love that you called him Daddy, Jonathan, that he maybe used it sometimes as a, maybe like how he had Ved's dad kind of like show him the article. Like that to me seemed like it showed that Ved's dad maybe knew that Ved was gay, or that trying to show him that he was okay with that. So maybe he was mostly using it as that as a way to move the story forward rather than actually wanting to interrogate the law and really make it part of the book.
Yeah, I agree with you, Saul. And I forgot to mention earlier that this book reminds me a lot of the book My Policeman. I can't remember the author of that book's name, but it's a very similar story. A gay man falls in love with a married straight man, and a whole romance ensues, but then they become outed in a very conservative time period where being gay is illegal. But in that story, there's a lot of legal repercussion. We follow the gay man that was not married through his imprisonment, and then how that shapes his life when he gets out of prison. And I was just so confused, like a couple of you have said, that there was really no repercussions. I mean, I guess it's a rom-com, so I'm not looking for anything too harsh. I'm glad that his family obviously accepted him, and I'm glad that Disha was okay with everything. But in terms of like his job, his and everything else, there was just nothing really that happened, especially because Section 377 doesn't become outlawed until a few months after the main story takes place. So I was just curious, when he was outed, what happened with that? It seemed as if everyone was okay with him being gay, which doesn't really make much sense, because then why would the law still be in place? But whatever. Also, the book reminds me a lot of a movie I watched last night, Imagine Me and You. I'm not sure if anyone here has seen that book, seen that movie, but very similar plot as well. Straight woman who's married falls in love with a lesbian. And then through their love, she finds out her own sexuality and all of that. And that's kind of what I was confused about in this story as well. It's mentioned early on how big a fan the main character Ved is of rom-coms. So I'm assuming if you're looking for rom-coms about queer people, that's like one of the main ones that comes up. So I'm assuming he and of course the author would have seen that movie. So I'm assuming at least part of this book is inspired by that film. Um, and that one works because we follow a woman who is unsure about her sexuality. She's always been convinced that she's straight, but just that her marriage is a little bit stale. And then she meets a woman and she learns what true love is. And I think even though that love story involves an element of cheating because she is married, you still find a way to root for the characters because you really just want the main woman to find out who she is, love herself, and then find true love. In this story, I think the cheating element makes Ved very unlikable. Um, I don't really see how you can interwork cheating into a romance without it being problematic. But I think the only way to truly do it is to have Ved's straight love interest, Disha, be so unlikable to where you don't want him to be with her. And I think the author kind of shot himself in the foot by making Disha so likable. I actually liked her way more than I liked Ved, which is bad considering that she's not the main character. Um, and especially because Ved going into the entire situation knows that he's gay. So the whole thing makes him seem like he's just this big liar, um, which again didn't make me root for he or Carlos to be together. Was anyone else rooting for them, or did you all just kind of want them to break up?
Yeah, I really wanted them to break up, and I wanted Disha. I I loved Disha a lot, and yeah, I was just like, I feel like there was also elements of, like, the patriarchal society where, like, his mom and, his fiance were doing all this work, and he was just, like, ignoring phone calls, and it just made him so unlikable. And I was getting so irritated where, at the minimum, he could be participating in his lie at least more instead of just lying and then making people do all this work. And then in the end, for nothing. Right. And so, and then even with Disha's cheating, which was I was just like, thank goodness Disha was actually getting something that she wanted, like, out of this whole thing, is how I felt.
Yeah, I did not find Ved to be likable. I kept waiting for like the bad thing to happen because I knew it was going to happen. Of like people figuring it out, or like he or him getting married, which would be the worst. So I just kept waiting and waiting, and every time he did more and more and just dug himself further, I was like, "Oh, come on, Ved, like, just be honest." And at some point, um, like I when Disha met her, past boyfriend, I thought that they were gonna get together, but then it kind of wasn't brought up again. But I had been like, why wouldn't it be great if Ved and Disha did marry each other and Ved could go and in Ved came out and they had this mutual agreement that both of them would follow their actual loves but be married like a lavender marriage, right? Be married for their parents' sake and for the company's sake and whatever for culture's sake. Like I thought that would be the best case scenario in their like very rigid society, that they could marry each other but still live as their authentic selves as long as they were very clear with each other. And um yeah, so that's kind of how I thought the book would end eventually, that they would get married but would have this agreement. I'm glad that that wasn't the case and they both got to be each other without having to marry each other. But yeah, I found Vet to be very unlikable, mostly when he brought Carlos over to his like family's vacation home, that I was like, oh, come on, like this is just entirely too much. Like this is so risky for you to do this.
Yeah, I agree. Um I also found him to be very unlikable and very selfish. I think what did it for me was when Ved had that conversation with Carlos. Um, when Carlos had opened up to him about the previous difficulties with his past relationship that he had had, which almost mirrored his current relationship with Ved, and how he was really hoping that Ved could be honest with him if he was involved with somebody else or if he wasn't 100% committed to Carlos. And Ved just lied to his face and said that there wasn't anything else going on, that he was being completely truthful from the beginning. Meanwhile, holding in this very huge secret that involved a lot of people outside of um, just him. So, yeah, I felt bad for Disha. I felt bad for Carlos. I felt bad for everyone involved.
Yeah, I agree. I think I may have got us a little bit ahead of ourselves by not going through our main characters early on. But since we've already talked about Bed so much and we've talked about Disha a little bit, what are you guys' general thoughts on Carlos as a character in this story?
Um, I kind of like Carlos, but there are a lot of questionable things or things that don't necessarily make sense to me. Um, and like one of them is like the fact that him and Disha went to the same school for the same thing, and they like he's in India and talking about like other Parsons people. I I don't think they ever like crossed paths or anything, but it really shocked me that they didn't. That felt like for them to mention that so many times. I know this is not necessarily about Carlos's character, but that did like bother me a little bit. Um, but outside of that, I don't know. I feel like there were some like big things that he was like missing or like not necessarily like reflecting on the way that someone more realistically might have in that situation. Especially like with who that is. Like I feel like that should have been so easy to like find out or understand. Especially because there's another scene where his engagement was like in a paper or a tabloid or something. And if Carlos is like out in the streets every day, like getting street food and seeing the sights, like I'm sure he's like walked by and see this man's like face on a magazine somewhere about this engagement thing. So that kind of surprised me that like never came up or that he didn't like do his due diligence once he knew exactly who Ved was to like just like Google his name. That was a little bit surprising to me, but I don't know. I yeah, that's it. Those are my initial thoughts on Carlos.
I feel like I liked Carlos as a character, but I didn't like the decisions that he was making. So I felt kind of conflicted about him overall. I like that he was just this person who was visiting Mumbai, doing his own thing, really trying to get the most out of that experience with traveling a new place and really trying to take in the sights. Um, but when it came to his relationship with Ved, especially since he had been through sort of a similar situation in his past, I just found that the decisions that he made along the way and giving him so many chances, despite all the red flags that were there pretty much from the beginning, were confusing to me. But um, overall, I mean, I guess I like that he was somewhat complicated and not just like a one-dimensional type of character, I guess.
Yeah, I liked Carlos as well. I think that we did get some background on him. I think he, talked about his coming out story, and we got to learn more about him living in New York. And I do love kind of how Cam was saying about how he really was playing this part of really being able to take advantage of being on this trip, and really take in the sights. And I think it was a good contrast to Ved, who really didn't take advantage of the city that he lived in, of his wealth, of really anything. And so Carlos was a good way for him to be able to find joy in life. So I did kind of like that contrast in what that brought out in Ved. However, I totally agree with Michael about how did Carlos like not look him up? If I then realized I was dating like a CEO with a lot of money, I would immediately Google him. So that really didn't make sense, and it also didn't make sense why Carlos initially reached out to Ved, because it seemed like Carlos did pursue Ved a long time before Ved actually replied. So I wonder what it was about Ved's profile that really drove him there, because it seemed like Carlos wasn't interested in just sex, but based on the very beginning of the story, it seemed like Ved's maybe not that his grinder profile was necessarily targeted towards that, but right, he probably didn't have his face in his pictures, all these different things that I was just wondering, like, what was that initial attraction for Carlos to be able to reach out to Ved?
Yeah, that is an interesting question, and that is something that I forgot about until you brought that up, where I was curious about how Grinder works. If a lot of people, like why would Carlos reach out so much? And then, I'm assuming hiding your face so that people can't see. And yeah, I liked Carlos for the most part. I thought he was just like a fun person, like, someone, out of all the characters that you would want to like go get coffee with and go exploring with, because like an adventurous person. But I agree with what folks have been saying, that it's like, why then, like, of all the millions of people that are around you, and especially whenever you know that someone is taking you back to like where you and like his dad lives, but then he's not out. And then like everything was just so risky all the time. And then I was just surprised that Carlos was surprised that Ved would be trying to sneak him out of his house whenever he said he wasn't out yet. And um so I didn't know, that it was weird. It, I guess, contrived. Like Carlos's character felt like it was just set up for Ved to be more adventurous, and I liked Carlos, but it almost felt like Carlos was made for Ved in the story, and not necessarily a person that like came into the story. And that's why I think parts of the personality felt confusing sometimes.
You had a hand raised, Soul?
No, I actually just keep pressing that instead of the react button. My bad.
Yeah, I think I'm on the opposite end. I didn't like Carlos at all. He is just like the typical manic pixie dream boy. And honestly, I think anytime an author chooses to rely solely on archetypes like the manic pixie, it's just lazy to me. It's unimaginative. Um, and I'm just naturally not gonna like the character. Um, and then there's that moment where Carlos tries to justify gentrification, and I was just like, yeah, no. I just Any hope of liking him died in that moment for me. Um, and yeah, I thought it was interesting, like Saul said, that there's a few weeks where Carlos keeps messaging Ved. And I thought that was so odd because Carlos is at least described as an obviously very attractive person. why do you keep messaging the same person over and over and over again? And it's not even like he's sending him like a hello or a are you available kind of thing. It's like sending him random updates on your trip, someone that you don't know. That's just so strange to me. Um, and when that kept happening in the beginning of the story, uh, I wasn't really trusting Carlos because we hadn't met him yet. There's a moment where Ved goes to the gym in the book for the first time, and he says something along the lines of, after recognizing the guy in the gym who was at the orgy the previous night or a few days ago, that he was worried whether or not that guy would pretend to be someone else to try and out him. And that's where I thought the whole Carlos grinder thing was going, because it just seems so odd to me that a random stranger keeps messaging someone if there's no ill intent. Um, so I thought the entire time that Carlos was going to be some kind of catfish outing thing, but that wasn't what happened. But so, and I guess my next question is, considering the fact that the book takes place in India, majority of the characters except for Carlos are born and raised in India, did you find it interesting that the characters always only speak English?
It's probably very American of me to say, but I didn't even notice that until you just pointed it out.
I honestly thought that it was just like for the reader's sake, um, that they just were made to speak English because the book is written in English. So I also didn't think too far into it. But I did realize, like, one of the things that caught my eye was how Ved called his mom like mum, like the British type of mom. So like that also to me like maybe brought that of like maybe they're wealthier, so they're like speaking English because you know the British impact in India. So that like was also another thing that I kept thinking about, that maybe that's just why they spoke English, considering how Ved spoke to his mom.
Welcome in, Arian. I see you're unmuted. Did you want to share?
Yeah, I didn't read too far into it myself, just because there was like a special glossary in the back, and so I just figured that they were just mostly talking about the different dishes and foods to kind of envelop you, and that the rest of the story was just you were just supposed to assume that would happen. But now that you mention it, there's a lot of like Latinx authors that I read, and they incorporate a lot of Spanish into their books. And then, like immediately after that, the person will speak English and then kind of almost translate what was said above. One of the books that comes to mind that I've read was like Bless Me Ultima, um, and they did that a lot in that book. And maybe that would have made this book better potentially and more immersive, because it yeah, I mean, I knew we were there, but it didn't really give me much to like the story as much. I felt like, like we said, that rewritten portions of the book was a little longer, a little bit more fleshed out. It probably would have been I would have probably enjoyed it more if it was in there, but I didn't even give it a thought, just because of how the book was written overall.
Michael, you're unmuted. Did you want to share?
Oh, sorry, that was not intentional.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't expect, of course, the book to be like primarily in Hindi or really even to include much Hindi language. But I'm just thinking back to when we read Monstrilio last year. Although the book is solely in English, it's mentioned intentionally when the characters are speaking English, which is then made to make us think that every other time that it's not mentioned, so and so says this in English, that they're always speaking Spanish, which helps immerse you in the fact that they do live in Mexico. In this book, because it was so much English, and then like Saul said, Ved always calls his mother mom. I kind of forgot they were in India, um, except for the times that they mentioned the 377 law, obviously. Um, so yeah. Now, to go back to Ved a little bit, do you think that his character could have benefited from being aged down some? I'm thinking instead of 38, potentially 28, 27. Would that have helped uh, his character at all?
Testing, can you guys hear me? Okay, cool. Um, I see some new faces. Hey, my name's Arian. I go by any pronouns, but I primarily use he, him, by the way. Um, Sorry for my voice. I have a cold and a sore throat. So, yeah. Um, I do think Ved would have his character as a whole, or my enjoyment of his character would have benefited from him being aged down, because the way he acted and the way he would react to some situations seemed very immature for someone his age. It seemed like he didn't have any lived experiences or like um any kind of like maturity to grapple with the things that he should have so much experience when dealing with. Like, um, you'd think he'd be so used um, to the prospect of being married off because he had like what 30-ish years to deal with it. But like, no, if he was 28, you're still pressured to be married when you're 28. Um, so there's that. Being aged, being 38 won't remove that pressure. Um, the plot with the other dude, I forgot his name, would still be there because the pressure would still be there. A lot of his reactions would make more sense. And um, yeah, um, that's it. He just didn't act like someone who was in the 30s, almost 40 range. That's it.
I totally agree. I actually, for most of the novel, just forgot how old he was, because of the way that he acted. Um, so to me, it didn't super impact the story because I just forgot. But considering the story and his age, he does seem very immature. And I also understand that he only ever had one other relationship, which really framed his understanding of relationships and maybe his own self-worth. Um, but it does seem right that he went to college and that he tried to work himself up to the ranks. And we can talk about how much, like, even if he did work hard, how much of that was already planned for him. But um, yeah, I would think that he would be more mature in a lot of the situations.
I agree. I could also see the book aligning a little bit more if he was 28 rather than 38. I do wonder if him being 38 even adds more so to that sense of urgency that I think particularly his mom has in trying to get him married. But like Arian said, I mean, that urgency would still be there if you were 28, I think. But maybe it was just amplified even more with him being 38. But otherwise, yeah, I feel like everything else considered, it would still work if you were 28.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I really hated the age difference between Disha and Ved so much. Like, I remember reading the book and just going, ugh, like as soon as I found out like how old she was and how old he was. And I feel like it would have just made more sense to age like him down because I feel like if you're going 38 years through life, and even if you've only had like one long, like relationship, you would still have like the life experience or knowing people or like the friendships. And I don't know, it was just, I think that's why the characters did just feel so one dimensional, because it didn't feel like he had many friends. And I know they tried to like, the author wanted to kind of play that workaholic angle. And but I don't know, it just seemed like he would have more friends also, just because he didn't I just he didn't fall into being a workaholic until after the breakup, is what they kind of made it sound like. So I'm just surprised that there weren't more like friendships in his life, especially for his age, or him talking about how maybe he let those friendships go because of maybe the depression or the being a workaholic, and getting those friendships back with like Carlos or something. But yeah, the age difference, I hated that by a lot.
Yeah, the age difference between he and Disha was very confusing to me. However, I do know that there are several cultures, even in American culture, where the idea of a much older man marrying a much younger woman is not that strange. Um, but I just think reading about it, it felt kind of icky. Also, considering the fact that Carlos is also quite younger than Ved is. I don't remember exactly how old he is, but I don't believe he's even 30 yet. And I just found myself asking, what is it with Ved and younger partners? Um, and I would have kind of liked for the author to touch on that a little bit more. Uh, and I found it funny that you, Grace, and Saul both brought up that Ved has only ever had one other relationship, which I can understand. Okay, this is a gay man living in a very conservative country. It's the dating scene is not going to be uh, as interesting as it would be in a country where it's not illegal to be gay. But I think considering that Carlos is only his second boyfriend and they were only together for 2 weeks, uh, it makes the love story to me a little bit unbelievable. Um, and that's another reason why I kind of found it hard to root for them to be together. It felt kind of like Ved only fell for Carlos because he is the only openly gay man he knows. And he's kind of enamored with the confidence that Carlos carries his sexuality with. Um, he's more in love with the idea of Carlos than actually being in love with Carlos. Uh, so, yeah. And I guess while we're here, I'm curious, what are you guys' thoughts on closeted people entering into heterosexual marriages?
This is just my like personal thought here. But knowing that marriage is like such a kind of like sought after social thing, or almost seen as like this is the goal, this is like the thing everyone has to do, and doing it like as a maybe like a means of survival, or almost as like a part of a mechanism for some sort of like business partnership, or any even just another like long-term partnership to like have a household together, maybe like have a kid together. I like don't really see any issue with that, even though it's not like grounded in love necessarily the same way that a romantic relationship is. It's still like gives some opportunity there where it may not be as easily found, especially if you're in like a really conservative place or it is like literally illegal, to be in the relationship that's most natural to you. It can be a good sort of, I don't want to say substitute, but like a good alternate path when what you really want or need doesn't seem viable. Still weird, but it can work.
Yeah, I would like to add on to like what, like Michael is saying is that, in I'm assuming like in this culture, like people get married to like almost complete strangers and it's just like a thing that you do. So, I would just kind of hope that once you decide that you're just going to do that, that you would like remain faithful and just be committed to the relationship itself, or be honest with the person that you're marrying and kind of go into it more as like a lavender marriage if that's something that's like not available to you, kind of like what we talked about before. We've been, I did like that idea that maybe like Disha and the main character would maybe talk about that, and this is something that they like feel like they have to do for their status and their family, but it's not something that you can do it non-traditionally in a traditional way, kind of feeling. And I think it's like just really complicated because with all these different like cultures and stigmas and it being illegal, and I just don't feel like there's really a good answer for that, that's not just like being alone and not really doing something for your family versus like this is such a cultural norm. And I just think it's like a really good question. It's like very complicated.
Okay, yeah, heavy agree with Grace and Michael. To add to what Grace said about the lavender marriage, I genuinely thought that Disha would come out as a lesbian some way around the book. But when they mentioned that she had an ex-boyfriend, I was like, oh, okay, that route is totally out the window. That's all. But yeah, it's really complicated. And I do think that if you're going to enter a marriage knowingly as a gay person, then you should be able to commit to your choice and not hop on Grinder as down low. But that's just me.
Yeah, I do agree with you all. I think there is a big difference between entering into a lavender marriage, or at least a marriage where maybe your spouse doesn't know your sexuality, but you're at least willing to commit to the marriage in some way, versus entering into a marriage uh, in a way that Ved is trying to, just out of pure dishonesty. And then, of course, sneaking around behind Disha's back, saying he's busy with work, but gallivanting around town with his boyfriend. Those are two very different kinds of scenarios. Um, I did think that Ved and Disha were going to enter into a lavender marriage because they had that conversation, I think, through the halfway point of the book, where where Ved first admits that he doesn't love Disha, and Disha admits it as well, and that she still loves her ex-boyfriend. Um, and then Disha says something to the effect of, uh, it's okay that you don't love me. As a woman, all I can hope for is that I'm at least marrying someone I can be friends with. And I thought at that point that would have been a really, really good chance for Ved to tell Disha the truth, and then for them to enter into a lavender marriage. Especially considering how committed Disha is, she's carrying the wedding on her back, while Ved is like not involved at all. Um, so it seems as if she was willing to commit to the promise that she made, but he wasn't, which I also think aids in making Ved look making Ved very unlikable. Uh, and I guess we know in the end that Disha admits that she always knew he was gay, but at any point in the book, did you guys also think that she knew? Or did you think for the entire time that she was just clueless?
Um, I find it hard to believe that she works in fashion and only sees her fiance like once a week or communicates via text and they don't really like kiss or anything, and she doesn't believe that. But yes, I think that she knew.
Yeah, same as Michael said, the lack of physical contact, and I know that maybe the norms are different in India as to like PDA and stuff like that, but that like as Disha would also raise flags for me and like the fashion industry thing too of her being a part of and going to Parsons and probably being around other gay people in the US that or I don't know where Parsons is. I'm guessing it's in New York City, but um that I would have thought that she also knew, just as I thought that Prem knew that Ved was gay, and that maybe he thought he was hiding it better than he was, but he clearly wasn't.
Yeah, I don't think the PDA thing really bothered me because, so like you said, there are some cultures that are a bit more conservative uh, with affection than others. Um, but I thought the conversation they had about not loving each other, I thought she would take that as him coming out, especially because he was very intentional to not use any sort of pronouns when talking about his past relationship, which I think is oftentimes a dead giveaway that someone probably is queer if they're like purposely avoiding pronouns. Um, but I don't know. Uh, okay. What did we think of the relationship between Ved and Carlos? I know we talked about not wanting them to end up together, but for the 2 weeks that they were together, what did you guys think?
Uh, eye roll. I was looking for like an eye roll emoji. I don't know. I guess it, that's I guess that's how I feel about it. Just like there's sometimes when I just wanted to like skip over pages. I couldn't take it anymore. And that's whenever the manic pixie part I think came to full fruition for me, where it was like otherwise Carlos was fine for me, and then as soon as they started interacting one on one, I just I did make large sighs. So just ugh, I think is going to be my takeaway from that, and I couldn't wait for it to be over.
Okay, so I know that gay time moves differently from straight time, but to have all that happen in 2 weeks kind of surprised me because I kind of forgot the time frame that they were working in. But exactly as Grace said, it was oh I don't know, it didn't hit. The banter wasn't hitting. The flirting, it was very cringe. Um, yeah, it yeah, that's all.
Yeah, I agree. It felt very almost like love bombing in the way that it was manifesting. And I just kept wondering like what the long-term goal was if Carlos was going to be leaving anyway. And they kind of kept interacting as if they were trying to set themselves up for like a long-term relationship. And I don't know, it just eh, that was kind of a strange dance that was happening too.
Yeah, I found their relationship very odd. I kept wondering why the author himself on the back of the book chooses to describe this book as a rom-com, because I kept wondering where's the romance and where's the comedy. I think we've had this issue in a few books that we read a few books we've read before, where the author chooses to tell us the characters are in love as opposed to showing us. Like I just kept wondering throughout the entire story, when exactly do they fall in love with one another and why? And then I believe it was Cameron or Saul earlier said they kept wondering what exactly Carlos gained from this relationship. And I totally agree. I get what Ved gained because Ved was able to be with someone who was helping him explore his sexuality and helping him become more comfortable in who he is. But from Carlos's perspective, what did he really get outside of good sex? Um, I don't know. I just didn't really see what he was able to gain from it. But yeah, to each their own, I guess. Now, since I don't think any of us loved this book, I'm curious, how do you guys think the book could have improved?
This is kind of a small thing, but I remember reading through the first half of it and wondering why it was taking so long for Carlos to actually enter the picture, and for their interaction with Ved to actually like begin, because it didn't actually start until like halfway through, and I kept wondering, man, this like I know I had this feeling that like Ved wasn't going to go through with the marriage, and I felt like all the arrangements and all of the, I don't know, the frills were just taking too long, and it just felt like it was really dragged out.
I don't know if I would say that this would make it better, but I would be curious to see a reaction to Ved coming out other than like embracing him with open arms, which is what seems like happened with everyone, with his parents, with Disha. It's just like it felt like they made such a big deal about so many things, and the stuff about work, like oh, this is like your father's company, and like when you get married, you know you're like you're now the son, and you inherit all these companies is like such a big deal. But then at the same time, it's like, oh, just like sell this company we worked our entire lives and many generations for. It's fine. It's whatever. We love you. Go do everything. Nothing matters. Just go be yourself. But I didn't really get that throughout the whole story, and then everything just resolved in like this really beautiful, like everyone loves you, it's going to be great. And I would have liked to have seen some sort of, not necessarily conflict, but maybe different or more realistic seeming reactions.
Okay, to add to what Michael said, when they when they called off the wedding, there was practically nothing. There's no consequence to it. You just get like, oh, Disha's dad is angry, but then that's it. Like, where's the flavor? Um, to add to what Cam said, I really thought that the random gym guy that Ved met and recognized from that party was going to be the love interest, but it wasn't. And I was fully expecting him to start flirting with him on the treadmill or something, but that never happened. And it's this random grinder conversation that's happening in real time. That's the love interest. And I'm like, oh, okay. So, yeah, I do think the story could have benefited from Carlos being introduced earlier, like what Cam said. And uh, the aging down would have been nice, I think. Uh, the writing style did take a bit to get used to, but then I got used to it. But I feel like they did do a bit of um, showing, not telling. I mean, they did a lot of telling and not showing. Um, like, I think it was Johnathan that said this, but they told us that the characters were in love. They didn't really show us. And when they did flirt and try to show, it was really bad. So the flirting could be improved, but yeah, it was a book. Let's just say that.
Yeah, I totally agree with all that. And I just kind of thought about, like what did Carlos get out of that whole situation? Probably money. That's the only thing I can think of is the why anyone would like stick around with like I don't know. Like it was just so yeah. I feel like Carlos could have come into the picture way earlier. Or even if they didn't end up together, I feel like it being a gay awakening book would have really improved like everything where like Carlos and that, they get together. Like that realizes that he's just spent his whole life hiding and it's okay to have bad consequences, because he's been hiding. And so kind of like that dynamic tension of who you are versus culture versus, the government and family dynamics. I think having that dynamic tension would have really improved the book. And I feel like you again, like where's the comedy? Like I didn't laugh at all of anything that had happened. And I think you can have romance without the two characters ending up together also. So, I totally forgot it was only 2 weeks, or less. And so, I feel like you could have just had like this really cool awakening and that you could have like learned something from yourself because of this, person who's like not from there, who came and was visiting. And then, you kind of had a talking to Disha, and I was also hoping that Disha would be like a lesbian or, like something, but then, that didn't pan out. But, like just some sort of awakening in the whole book and like lessons learned and some sort of tension with the family at all. Yeah, because it was just like nobody cares that he's not taking over the family. Nobody cares about any of this. Like that's I mean, I don't feel like Ved would have been so anxious if anyone would have not cared. So, yeah, I really would have hoped that there would have just been more character building, um, in any capacity would have been great. And I think the relationship between Vet and his mother could have been improved, as in, like, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more character development other than all of a sudden the mother is now fully developed at the end of the book and is like going to therapy. And I was like, maybe Vet should go to therapy. I was just, everyone's character just did surprising things that wasn't in line with what was going on the entire time. And I feel like consistency throughout the book would have greatly improved the book.
I totally agree. I can't remember who said about not really liking the author's writing style, and I agree, it wasn't my favorite. And then I read the description about the author and the fact that he did start as a journalist, and I was like, oh, this actually makes a lot of sense to me. He did write another book, but it did make sense to me that he's also a journalist, in the terms of the way that he wrote. I also don't know what would have made the story different for me, but I do agree that what with everybody, what everybody has said so far, I think that that would have improved the book. I wonder too how the book would be if there was no Carlos and Ved had a series of relationships and not just one, right? When we expect in 2 weeks for them to fall in love, like if we had seen kind of a development of Ved's confidence as he dated more people, even if they were like one night stands, of like what that brought out of him. So maybe to see him healing from Akshay in a different way than just in this one relationship, maybe would have been a little bit better. But I'm also not a writer myself, so I don't know what I would have liked to see. But maybe those like series of relationship rather than just one. Oh, and I also like to add that it was surprising to me that everything was just okay after he came out, even though, like, maybe I understand, right, if his nuclear family is okay with that, but to me, it would seem like there would be a lot of social and cultural backlash on him coming out, because it seemed like there was for that designer that was on the paper, right? Like, the fact that the designer was on the paper caused this big, like, thing in the newspaper. So, like, the fact that that didn't also cause it for Ved and his family was really surprising, because I would imagine that that would, like, not help the company out, that, like, that might cancel some of the things that a lot of just cancel a lot of the things that his family was working on, and, like, the perception of his company and of his dad and of his family on the wider Indian society.
Yeah, I agree with all of you that the book, I think, severely lacked consequence for everything that Bed was doing. I can't remember who said it, but um, someone mentioned that Ved has a lot of anxiety about being outed. He has a lot of anxiety about his dad's company, about not being able to run it well. He has so much anxiety about living up to his parents' expectations. And then towards the end of the book, his parents just give him like a big, do whatever you want, it's your life kind of speech. And that then for me kind of undermines all of Ved's anxieties, and it makes it seem like it's just in his head. It's like Ved had to go through all of this just to have that brief conversation where his parents encourage him to do his own thing. It's like you could have done that 38 years prior to this. Like, why wait this long to find that out? That's odd to me. Also, Grace, I love how you mentioned that a lot of the characters towards the end of the novel were kind of doing things that were incongruent to how they were originally set up as characters. I felt that so strongly with Ved because when we first meet him, he felt like such a different character to me than who he is throughout majority of the book. When we first met him, he's like sniffing poppers, going to orgies, all of this, all of that, and then he's like he's doing all these things but doesn't know about a popular gay party. Um, that to me didn't make much sense. Um, he also seemed so inexperienced for someone who, as he describes himself, hooks up on Grindr pretty regularly. But he's still so inexperienced. Um, the mother seemed so overbearing in the beginning, and then towards the end, she's just so chill. The dad seemed so like cold and distant, and then throughout the entire novel, he's actually pretty gentle with Ved. Um, I was expecting more of like a disciplinarian, a bit more of a hard ass kind of father, but I just really made no sense to me, but sure. Um, I guess my last little question I was wondering towards the end of the book, were you able to make out who the famous pop star singing at Disha's wedding was?
Okay, I cheated and I peeped on Goodreads, and apparently it was Lady Gaga, and I did not get Lady Gaga from that. Nothing came to my mind with that description of a pop star, honestly. It was so vague. It could have been anyone, but allegedly it was Lady Gaga.
I honestly thought it was Lady Gaga, because when they mentioned pop star, I was like, Lady Gaga. So I also thought Britney Spears, but I was like, no, that seems like it's no longer current. And maybe I don't listen to enough pop music to know of any other ones, but that's who came to mind for me.
Yeah, I did the same thing as Arian. I peeped on Goodreads after I finished the book and saw that someone claimed it's Gaga. I don't think it's ever confirmed by the author, so possibly it's not. But um, I thought it was Beyonce because Ved says it's the queen of pop, this ultra famous international pop star. I assumed Beyonce, so Gaga kind of makes no sense. And then it being Gaga makes even less sense to me because how is Disha someone who has gone to fashion school? She's a fashion designer. She's a huge Gaga fan, but she doesn't know a gay man when she sees one. That's very odd, but whatever. That's just me. Okay, that's all I have in my notes. Before we move on, does anyone else have any last minute questions, comments, characters we missed, plot lines we missed they want to go over? Anything?
Wait, I also want to say that I thought maybe it was going to be Madonna just based on the Queen of Pop. There were so many people that I just couldn't decide.
Okay. So to discuss our books for next month, I'm kind of torn between two. So I will give you guys the option. Would you rather read a drama next month or a historical fiction?
I'm open.
Yeah, me too. Can you say a little bit more about like the timing of the historical fiction?
Yeah, the historical fiction starts off in, I want to say 1909, and it ends in, I think, 1942 or early 1940s. And if anyone's curious, the drama takes place in like the late 70s, early 80s kind of time period.
If you had to pick a color for each book, what color would they be?
I see you know where I'm going. I'm not going to say it. But yes, if anyone can pick up what Grace is putting down, that is the historical fiction pick for next month, if we pick that book.
Can you just tell us what the books are?
Sure. The Color Purple would be the historical fiction by Alice Walker, and then the drama would be Don't Cry for Me by Daniel Black. I can go ahead and put descriptions in the chat if you guys would like to read them. Give me just a second. So go ahead and read the descriptions and let me know what you guys think. I know The Color Purple is pretty popular, so a lot of you guys have probably read them. I've read both of these books before. Yeah. I will say, though, if you haven't read The Color Purple, it is a lot. It's a lot going on. It's a very heavy story. So if you're not in the mood for that next month, then don't pick that book.
I'm open to both. Like you said, I know The Color Purple is a pretty popular book that other people might have read. I have never read it, so that would be interesting for me to know because it is like so well known that I should finally read it. But if other people are like, I already read that, I'm fine for the other one too.
Yeah, I haven't read either, and I am open to both. The way I make decisions sometimes, if I can't pick, whichever book is easiest to obtain slash the cheapest is sometimes how I pick like my next read for things. If people can't decide.
I haven't read either of them as well, um, but I think I'm voting for Don't Cry for Me. Yeah, like letters Letters. I love letters. Stories driven through letters gets me every time. Yeah.
If anyone's kind of stuck in the middle, I guess another tip to decide is the color purple. I won't spoil anything, but I will say there is a lot of rape in this book, a lot of misogyny, obviously considering the time period. I know we've read a book previously that had a lot of rape in it, and no one liked that book. So you might not want to read that one. I don't know. I don't want to discourage anyone, but just know that.
I haven't read either one, and yeah, I'd still be open to either one.
Okay. I guess I'll just go ahead and pick. Let's read Don't Cry for Me. Why not? Okay. This book, I know it says it's like 301 pages. I've read it before. It's told through letters, and some of the letters are literally one sentence. So it's shorter than that. It's a very, very fast read. It shouldn't be hard to get. As always, I do have PDF copies of the books we read. So if anyone can't seem to find it, let me know on Discord and I can send it to you. And I was thinking for next month, we can meet on the last Sunday as usual, which I believe is the 23rd. Let me just double check that. Yes, 23rd at 12 p.m. or whatever time it is, wherever you guys live. Does that work for everyone, or do you guys want to move the meeting day, move the meeting time?
That works for me.
Yeah.
That works for me.
It works for me too.
Ditto.
Was I muted that entire time?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Wow. What was I saying? I think I said that I will put us down for Don't Cry for Me by Daniel Black for the 23rd of next month at 12 p.m. PST. You'll see a meeting on book clubs in about an hour or two, and then you'll also see a Discord server for the book in about an hour or so. Thank everyone for coming. This is our biggest turnout so far, I think. So that's great. Happy New Year to you guys. And what else did I say? Oh, take care of yourselves until I see you. But hopefully I can see you guys all here next month. But until then, enjoy the rest of you guys' day. Bye.
Awesome. Thank
Always,
you.
thanks so much, Jonathan.
Thank
Awesome.
No
you.
problem.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
See y'all.